You're listening to the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
Wrestling every night, and that's the thing. You know, if you get in the ring and you wrestle for 15 or 20 minutes, that's a hell of a workout. You know, so it wasn't like you had to go to the gym and do 300 Hindu squats every day.
Now, Mr. DiBiase, of course we know, and hopefully our listeners know that you graduated, went to West Texas A&M, college over there in Texas and stuff that had probably, in my opinion, the greatest alumni of professional wrestlers ever. You, Tito Santana, Dusty Rhodes, the Funks, of course. When you got the $1 Million gimmick and you had Virgil as your servant, I guess, and we all heard the story that Virgil was basically a play on Dusty Rhodes, his actual name and everything, and then the $1 Million Dream was a shoot basically at his gimmick name of being the American Dream. How did you feel personally about that, especially for the fact that, y'all were both alumni of the same college?
Well, there was a lot of guys. There were a bunch of guys that came out of West Texas State that didn't just become wrestlers. They all became stars. It was incredible. Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Bobby Duncombe, both the Funks, Dusty Rhodes. Dick Murdoch didn't go to West Texas, but he was from West Texas. He was from Amarillo. And then me, Tito Santana, and Tully Blanchard were all on the same team, football team, at the same time. And right after us came Barry Windham and Kelly Kiniski, Gene Kiniski's son, who didn't stay in the business. So there was a bunch of guys. But the thing about Dusty, it was just a rib. It was kind of like, they were telling me, well, we're going to do this thing where you're going to have this guy's like, publicly he's going to seem to be like you're like your valet. He opens the door, he carries the bags, and he's also got the big guns and big arms. And anytime, the whole coward thing. I talk real big and somebody actually steps up and I step back and say Virgil Sick'em, So the name was actually, I'll be honest with you, it was like Bobby Heenan. I mean, we were in a car going to lunch, and we were just talking about that. This was in Stanford after we had the initial meeting. And they were telling me, now this is what we're planning on doing. We're gonna, we found this guy, and they showed me a picture of him. I had never met Mike, and he just had that look. And I said, well, we don't know what we're going to call him yet. And Bobby Heenan, just as a rib, said, why don't we call him Virgil? Dusty, I love that. And so they named him Virgil. I mean, that's how that came about. And the whole thing about the dream, the $1 Million Dream had nothing to do with Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. The $1 Million Dream, it was like the move was basically, it's the same hold that Sergeant Slaughter used that he called the Cobra Clutch. It's the same hold. But I just said, okay, I'm the $1 Million Man, and it's a sleeper hold, so I'm going to call it the $1 Million Dream. It had no reference at all to Dusty Rhodes. So anyway, that's the facts. Now the other thing was when I went to WCW, and it was decided that initially the whole NWO thing was supposed to be a bunch of guys coming from the WWF to run roughshod over WCW almost like a corporate takeover. The NWO's taken over. And of course, if there's a takeover going to happen, then, we need to have security. We need to have our own security because everybody's going to be gunning for us. And I said, what better security for me to have than the guy that I had? And so it was kind of my idea. I said, he's not doing anything. Why don't you bring Virgil in? And I said, and they said, well, what are we going to call him? We can't call him Virgil. And somebody said, let's call him Vincent. And everybody just cracked up laughing and said, okay, Vincent it is. So anyway, that's how that all went down.
This is the Undisputed Wrestling Show. We're talking to the $1 Million Man himself, Ted DiBiase, here on the Angry Marks Podcast Network. Ted, before we talk about what you got going on now, you already alluded to WCW. If I'm not mistaken, you were supposed to be the Eric Bischoff of the NWO. What do you think about your time in WCW? How do you remember it?
Well, it was just, when I left the WWF, as it was known then, I wasn't upset with anybody. I wasn't upset with Vince. I I never was unhappy with the company. But Vince had made a decision to put me back on the road. And, when I went back to work for him, I was a manager and a commentator. And at that time, managers only were at television. They didn't have to go on the road. And, as a commentator, I only had to be in the studio one day a week. So, this is like, my life-changing, ordeal took place in 1992. Up until that time, it was kind of like, I had been, just like everybody else out on the road, next town, next show, next party, let's go. And, so, and again, I wasn't addicted to drugs or alcohol. I used my share of that stuff, and, I was a real womanizer. That was my really big problem. And, so, if you're gonna stop drinking, you gotta stay out of the bar. And the road was the danger zone for me. To be out on that road on a daily basis, again, with a bunch of guys who are still wanting to have fun and I just knew that I didn't want to stay there. What I should have done is I should have sat down and had that conversation with Vince, and he and I had that conversation later. But, instead I just decided that, I can go to the other company. I can get a good job on a guaranteed 3-year contract, and I won't have to be on the road. So I went to WCW, and I'm sorry, but it was the most horribly run organization that I ever worked for. I mean, they call them the Monday Night Wars. Really what Ted Turner did, and basically I guess through Eric, because Eric was, getting the guys, he bought stars that Vince McMahon made. Every one of those guys, Hogan, all of them except Ric Flair and Sting had all, and I guess Lex they'd all been made by Vince McMahon. So he buys the best stars that Vince has, and now we're having the wrestling wars. Well, now name me one star that Eric Bischoff created. Maybe Goldberg, because Goldberg goes out and beats everybody that, was ever anybody in the ring. That's a pretty impressive thing. And to Goldberg's credit,
he tried, Ted, with, he kind of tried, I guess, with the Giant before he ended up Big Show.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sorry, but Eric never had an original idea in his life. And, he didn't know how to run that company, and he didn't know how to create stars. And basically, when the NWO thing started getting over, he saw how it was going, and, it was he decided to put himself in my slot. And I said, well, okay, great. And I just went to him, I said, look, Eric, I said, you hired me to do a job. I'm on a guaranteed contract. In other words, whether I show up or not, you still have to pay me. And I said, I'm not here to be Virgil. I'm not Hulk Hogan's belt bearer. Because it got to where, I was supposed to be the mouthpiece, and now I'm standing out there like doing nothing, and I just told him that. I said, if you ain't got anything better for me to do, if I don't have anything to say, and if you want to take the job that you hired me for, well, go ahead, do that. Just have a grand old time. I said, but in the meantime, I'm going to the house, because I'm not doing this crap. If you want to figure out something to do with me, then let me know. And so, he said, okay. So I went home, and when they brought me back, that's when they brought me back as a babyface manager for the Steiners, which really wasn't very smart either. But,
not really. It's kind of a waste of your talent.
It's just one night when we were after the show, I remember, Eric saying something to the effect that he was going to run Vince out of the business, and I literally laughed in his face. I said, what? I said, you know what? That ain't ever going to happen. Well, and guess, look who had to go to work for who. Eric really had to eat those words. Now, WCW now, prior to that, when it was doing this old thing, I mean, it wasn't too bad. I mean, I'm just saying while I was there and while Eric was the guy that was in charge, it was chaos. We would go on television. We'd be going on our show live, the Nitro show, and they still hadn't figured out what they were going to do in the last segment of the show. That's how chaotic it was. It was just crazy. So, anyway, there it is. I would imagine I'm not the first person that has said that.
No, you're not. I don't think you'll be the last either, Ted. Before we segue into what you got going on now, something was hitting me a little bit earlier, and I was thinking about, Iron Mike DiBiase, and his passing when you were still fairly young. Did he know at all before that you had intentions of becoming a wrestler, or did you even know at that time?
Well, I always wanted to. I never really said anything to him about it because he didn't want me to. And it's like, and Mike was actually my stepfather, but
right.
I was 5 years old when he came into my life, so I was still a little kid, and he's the only dad I ever knew, and I loved him dearly. And that's just it. I wanted to be just like him, but he didn't want me to be a wrestler for the same reasons as I grew up and became the wrestler he didn't want me to be. I figured it out. I went, okay, now I understand why you didn't want me to do this, Dad. That's the same reason I didn't want my kids to do it. And, by the grace of God,
so you said the same thing to Teddy
when
he asked you, right?
Yeah, same thing. And so, but I knew I had to let my son go and try, but he figured it out on his own. I'm very proud of Ted. He was very good. All of the agents, the producers, as they call them now, aren't all of them. When he was there, they all told me, he's one of the best, he's the best young guy we got. And he could work, he could wrestle, he could call a match. He could, when they brought a match to him, they said, we don't have to worry about it. We'd just come back and he'd tell us what he was going to do. And he picked up the business well. Things were going pretty good, and then he got an injury. Actually it was right after, when they had him and, Cody and Orton together. And, anyway, he had an injury that kept him out for a while. Then his son was born. And then he was actually back working, but they didn't put him on television because they didn't want to abuse him. They didn't want to just throw him out there and beat him up. They were trying to look for a spot for him. And in the meantime, his contract came up, and he just said, thank you, but I don't want to do this anymore. It's not, he told me, he said, Dad, you're right. He said, the amount of time that the business requires of you to be a star. Now, you want to be the curtain jerker guy. You want to be the guy that's on first match, second match, in the middle of the card. Okay, you work 4 days, you go home 3. But if you want to be a star, you're not just going to work 4 days. You've all heard John Cena talk about how much he's on the road. And he's being paid handsomely for it, but it also cost him a marriage. So, and that's what my son figured out. He said, I don't want to, it's not fair to my wife or my child. So, and he's doing other things now, doing very well.